My name's James Baverstock. I'm a Principal Accessibility Consultant at AbilityNet. Today we're having a session. We're going to have the session recorded. There's automated captions are available. You can turn them on from the meeting controls. Please do ask questions in the chat, and I'll pause for questions periodically, and we can have a look at those. And there's also a demo file which is available, and I'll pop a link to that into the chat in case you want to access that. If I can find the chat. I hope that's gone to everybody. So in chat, you should have a link there to the demo file, which you'll also get at the end of the session. My colleague Lizzie is also on the call. I'm a bit concerned because we're still getting people. There's an awful lot of people. I think I might just have to try, if 1 second, we could just hold on a second while I try to make Lizzie into a co-host so that she can let people in if people come in after we start. I just want to see if that's possible, where I would do that. Apologies for this. Possibly not here.
You should, James, be able to do it from the Zoom settings themselves. If you find me in the participants list, hopefully.
Oh, yes, yes. Thanks very much, Lizzie.
No worries. Sorry, everyone. We've had a bit of a last minute switch around, so I wasn't put on the original list.
Wonderful. So, Lizzie, I've now made you a co-host.
Yeah, fabulous. So, I can let people in now.
Wonderful. Thanks very much. Today we're going to be looking at how we can make accessible documents, accessible PDFs via InDesign. We'll start by thinking about what makes an accessible document. So thinking about document accessibility at a high level, looking at what digital accessibility is, how the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines can apply to documents, as well as what features we expect to see in an accessible document. We'll then go on and think about accessible content creation in InDesign. So how we should think about using InDesign in an accessible document creation workflow, and the basics of using paragraph styles and built-in tools within InDesign for accessibility. We'll then look at some visual design considerations for accessibility, which are particularly important for a designer's program like InDesign, including use of color contrast, images of text, and a few considerations about typography and layout. And then we'll have a demo of applying accessibility principles to InDesign documents, including headings, lists, links, alt text for images, tables and tables of contents. And then we'll finish by looking at exporting to an accessible PDF and automated checkers that you can use on your PDF. As I mentioned, I popped in chat already a link to a zip file, which contains a demo file, which contains the things that I worked through today, including the stuff that we'll go through in terms of headings, text, lists, tables, images, links, tables of content, reading order metadata, and export tags. You don't need to follow this through as we go through today. So the session is being recorded. So if you want just to listen as I go through this morning, and then potentially you can watch the recording later on and follow along with the demo file. Also in that zip file is an exercise file, which you can also potentially do after the training today, which I'll explain at the end of the webinar. So just to start off, to make sure everyone is on the same page in terms of the basics of accessibility, I'm going to quickly describe what accessibility is and how it can be applied generally to documents to start the session. We start on this slide, and we have here a photo of Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of the World Wide Web, and a quote from him that the power of the web is in its universality. access by everyone, regardless of disability, is an essential aspect. And this is the core reasoning behind why we want to make our content accessible. So accessibility is about removing barriers and making information, education, and services available to everyone, so nobody's excluded. And digital documents are key to this. On many websites you go to, a lot of information is tied up in a document format, usually PDF, and many of these PDFs originate in InDesign, so learning about making documents accessible in InDesign is really worthwhile. And when we start thinking about digital accessibility, the main standard that we'll come across is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG, WCAG as it's abbreviated here. And this has 4 high-level principles which can be abbreviated to PAW: perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And these are a good shorthand for understanding what we need for digital accessibility in general. And these can be applied to your documents that you create in InDesign, as well as to web pages.
I'm stuck in a webinar now for.
Apologies. I just want to see if I can just, if it's possible to mute everybody, just while we, if I have an option to mute all. So I've just muted everybody except myself. You can unmute yourself, but if I can ask everyone just to stay unmuted while I'm talking, because there's so many people on the call that it's going to be disturbing otherwise. Perceivable. So we want to make sure that content's presented in ways that can be perceived by all, so including people who can't perceive the visuals in our document. So we need to make sure that we have alternative text for informative images, good color contrast for text, and informative images like charts. We want to avoid using color alone to convey information. We want to use semantic elements like headings, lists, and tables appropriately, so assistive technology can interpret them for users who maybe can't see the page. We also want to make sure that our documents are operable. So we want to make sure that our links and our form controls are keyboard operable, so that they can be operated by someone who potentially isn't using a mouse. And we'll also see as we go through today that there are also considerations for focus order if people are tabbing through our document with a keyboard. We also want our documents to have a descriptive document title, which also comes under this operable principle. We also want to make sure that our documents are understandable. So for assistive technology users, we need to set the language on our documents to ensure that they're going to be announced correctly. We also want to have good labels and instructions if we're using document forms. And then finally, we want to make sure that our content is robust, that it's going to be reliable and compatible with assistive technology and standards. And when we're using InDesign, we can think about creating documents using the accessibility features that are built into InDesign in the way that they're intended to be used to ensure that our documents are going to work predictably with assistive technology such as screen readers and braille displays. And we'll talk a lot about that as we go through today. We can also think about accessible documents in terms of what the characteristics of an accessible document are. What would we expect to see in an accessible document? So fundamentally, our accessible documents need to have searchable, machine-readable text. This is most often a problem if we have PDFs that originate in scans, which are just images of a page and images of text, where there's no machine-readable text for technology like a screen reader to access. But we can also think about making sure that we don't use images of text within our documents, which we'll talk about a bit later on. We also want our accessible documents to have good navigational aids, so good descriptive headings, and also for longer documents, we may want to use bookmarks, we may want to have a table of contents to ensure that people can navigate around our documents in a variety of ways. We want to have good metadata, so we want to have a descriptive title, and we want to have the document language explicitly set so that someone using a screen reader is going to have it announced using the correct language. Fundamentally for accessibility, we need to have a programmatic document structure. So in a PDF, this means that we want to have a tagged PDF. And tags work like invisible labels that tell screen readers and braille displays what the parts of a document are. So headings, lists, and tables. If you have a document visually, it's going to be very evident to a sighted user what elements of the document are headings, what elements are lists, how the tables are constructed. But if you have somebody using a screen reader, this needs to all be announced for them. And to do this, we need to prepare our PDFs with tags. And we'll go through this in a lot of detail as we go through today. We also need to have a logical reading order defined. So if somebody is accessing our document with a screen reader, we need to make sure that it's going to read out in an order which will make sense. And again, we'll look at how we can determine this within our InDesign documents before we save them to PDFs. We also want to make sure that if we have interactive elements like links or form controls, that we can tab to them with a keyboard so that they're keyboard accessible. And we want to make sure that if we have informative non-text elements like images like charts or graphs, for example, that we have appropriate alternative text for them. So we have a text version that can be read out for screen readers. And we also finally want to make sure that we appropriately format our tables. So again, if we have something like a table, the structure of it is going to be evident to a sighted user, but we need to prepare our tables in particular ways so that that structure can be announced for users of screen readers as well, so that they can equally access the information in that table. And this is pretty much a summary of the things we'll be looking at as we go through today. And I'll just pause there in case there's any questions up to this point. Yes, there were some questions that have come in. Some of these I think I'll need to deal with as we go through. There's a question about the new version of Acrobat not picking up tags and articles from InDesign. This might be a bug in Acrobat, but I think later on when we look at the articles window in particular, there might be something associated with that which is causing that, which I'll show then. And we'll also discuss the different ways of saving to Acrobat from InDesign, because if there's a bug in one version, it might be good to use another version. So we can talk about those later on. There's a question about problems with link tags throwing an error. I can see the tag is there when I check in InDesign and Acrobat. What am I doing wrong? We can look at this when we get to the link section, but it could be that this, I think I'd need to know what the error is that's being reported in automated checkers. It could be if you're getting reported that it is a missing annotation on the link, then that means that would mean that you need to follow what will show the way of creating links that we're going to show. If it's complaining about missing alternate text in the link, then we could show what you could do about that. But we'll have a look at that when we get to talk about links. And then there's a question about recommending a PDF compressor that doesn't remove the tags. The ones I use, such as iHeart PDF and Small PDF, remove the reading order when compressing. So I would really recommend sticking to Acrobat, so you can reduce the size of, really use Acrobat if you want to keep the tags correct. So I would really make sure that you've got a copy of Acrobat and use the compression within Acrobat to compress your PDF rather than use other compressors. I think that was the questions that we had at the moment. So I'll come back to some of those when we look at the articles panel and links and saving to different versions of PDF later on. So to move on and think about the basics of creating accessible content in InDesign, a really fundamental thing about InDesign accessibility is that it should not be the last step in your process. A last-minute approach is going to result in a bad result. Accessibility is always going to be easier and less costly when it's considered at the design stage or the source document. We've got an image here of some wiring in a house, and the idea here is that if we were decorating a house, we would want to make sure that we did our wiring first and then we do our decoration. and leaving all your accessibility until you get the stage that you've got a PDF, and then trying to do all of that fixing in Acrobat is like trying to do your wiring after you've already completed all your decoration of your house. It just doesn't make sense. So anyone who's tried to do accessibility with Acrobat will know that it's very time consuming. And the problem with trying to fix PDF accessibility in Acrobat is that if somebody comes along with changes for your document, you then need to do the changes in InDesign and then potentially do all the accessibility fixes in Acrobat again, which just does not make sense. So really, you want to try to do as much fixing as possible in terms of accessibility, bake in as much of it as possible using the techniques we're going to show today into your InDesign source file. You then want to export to a tagged PDF file. So as we mentioned, a tagged PDF file has all those invisible labels that will tell people what are headings, what are links, what are tables, etc. And we'll show how we can get those into the InDesign document as we go through today. And then you're probably going to need to test your PDF. You might need to clean up some remaining issues. There are a few areas where you can't remediate with InDesign. One of the main ones is in terms of if you have complex tables, you can't set the scope for table headers or set header cell ID associations for complex tables in InDesign. You need to do those in the table editor in Acrobat. Generally, we advise for tables, it's probably better to try to keep your tables simple so that you don't have to do extra work in Acrobat. There's a few things you might need to do some things in an Acrobat, but generally 90% of the work you can do within InDesign, and then that makes sure that you don't need to redo things in Acrobat if you need to do changes to your InDesign file. And a really, really fundamental thing to understand is that you want to avoid formatting items individually using the tools in the formatting toolbar. So what you don't want to do is if you decide you want something to be a heading, you don't want to go up to the formatting toolbar and just make that individual element big and bold and red. Instead, you want to do something called setting up a paragraph style for your heading. And then you can use that paragraph style to apply the formatting to anything else that needs to be that level of heading. And you can also use that to tell the PDF export process what you want your tag to be for that heading. The advantages here are it helps to avoid visual inconsistency for all users, because that way, if you've got a paragraph style for your heading 1, your heading 2, you're always going to have that element formatted the same way, which is going to save you time and effort in itself. But vitally for accessibility, using paragraph styles also allows us to set the tags for a particular element. And we can use paragraph styles we can set them up via the paragraph style window. And I'm going to go in now to the demo document we'll be using so I can demonstrate this. So we have here a demo file, this Dolphins Handbook, which we're going to work through today. I've got my paragraph styles window open here. If you don't have this open, you can go to Window, Styles, Paragraph Styles to open that up. And if I get my type tool here, we could have a look. If we go down the document, we can have a look at this page. And we can see here I've got a heading level 1. And this is using the style section heading 1, and I could have a look at this. If I double click on this, we could examine it. If I click on this, we can examine it, and we can see that within this section heading 1 paragraph style, we've got defined all of the formatting for this element, so what it looks like. But critically for accessibility, we have this section down here called export tagging. We can set how we export to an EPUB or an HTML file, but the thing we're going to be talking about today is exporting to PDFs. So we can see here that because I have my export tagging set up here, I have my PDF. This type of style should be exported to an H1 tag when it goes through to the PDF. So here I'm explicitly telling the PDF export process, when you get to export this, this needs to be an H1, a heading 1, when it goes through to the PDF. Similarly, if we click on another tag here, we can see that this has a style called subhead H2. If I right click and edit this, and go to the export tagging, we can see that this is going to go through to an H2 tag in my PDF. And if I just click on some body text here, we've got a style called body text. And if I edit that, we can see the export tagging that this is going to go through to a P tag. So this is going to go through to a regular paragraph tag in our PDF. So it's really important that we get these paragraph styles, that we're using paragraph styles so that we can say what these are going to be tagged as when they go through to the PDF. So when you're setting up your documents, there's going to be a bit of work to start with, that you want to set up paragraph styles for your headings and for your body text. If you want to add a new paragraph style, you can do so by selecting a style. Here I've selected basic paragraph, and if you press on plus, you can create a new style, and you can edit that style, and you could type in your formatting if you wanted to create a style and then set appropriate export tagging. But the easiest way to create a new style is to do some formatting on the page and then turn that into a new style. So here I've got some text that has a style called intro text. If I wanted to create a new style with a different color intro text, I could select that text. I can do my formatting, maybe change this to a blue color here. So it's a blue color. I could then press the plus button to add a new style and change that style so that that was, we could call this blue intro text. And critically, I want to go down to my export tagging, and I want to set that to export to a P tag because it's going to go through to a paragraph in my PDF. And then if I wanted to apply that blue intro text style to another paragraph, I could just click in there and then click on my blue intro text style, and that will then apply that style also to the other paragraph. So this is how you can potentially create paragraph styles and apply them within your documents. Obviously, there's a bit of setup here. So if you don't use paragraph styles at the moment, you need to think about how you need to think about setting these up. Once you've got them set up, then it might be helpful to have a basic template set up within your organization so that you've got a basic InDesign file that has maybe the heading level set up ready, the paragraph style set up ready. So there's basic styles available. You can also import styles from another document by this option here in the paragraph styles window to load paragraph styles. This will load all the paragraph styles from another InDesign file. So if you've set up headings and paragraphs within another InDesign file, you could export them across to another document potentially. When you're choosing your styles, you want to have P for paragraphs, an H1 to H6. You may also see the option, just an H option here, and you generally want to avoid using the H option because this doesn't tend to get read out correctly by screen readers. You want to make sure your headings are an H1, H2, H3, H4, H5. We'll talk a bit later about headings in a bit more detail, but essentially your main heading is going to want to be an H1, the next heading level down H2, next heading level down H3, and so on. Any other elements that aren't headings or plain text, normal paragraph text, is usually going to want to have the automatic tag. And here, what we want to do, if we want to create things like lists with bullets and numbering, tables of contents, we want to make sure that we use the built-in tools to create these items. And if we do this, then InDesign will mark these up with the automatic export tag. And it will magically, when it's exported to a PDF, it will magically put all of that formatting for the lists, the tables of content in for us. So we don't need to worry about it. But in order to leverage that functionality, we need to be very sure that when we're creating something like a list, we actually use the InDesign list function to do that. So we don't want to just draw a bullet, type some text, press enter, press tab, draw another bullet. We want to make sure we're actually using the list function. And as we go through today, we'll see, we'll demonstrate how we can use the features in InDesign to create lists, tables, and tables of content. And I'll just demonstrate, if we go back to the file again with my type tool selected, if I click on a list, I can demonstrate this. So we have a star for a list. And if I right click and edit list, we can see the export tagging is set to automatic. And this is correct because this is a list. It's been created using the list function in InDesign. because it's automatic, then InDesign's going to handle the tagging of that when it goes through to the PDF, and is going to do that correctly. Similarly, if I go to my table, we can see the table styles again. If I do edit table header text, the export tagging is going through again to automatic, because I've used the table feature to set this up. So I don't need to worry about the tags for this. InDesign is going to automatically handle the table tags correctly, because it's got this automatic tag that's showing that that's going to be done. So this is really the basics of using paragraph styles for our content. If we pop back, so it's the basics of using paragraph styles for our content. And I'll just pause there before we look at some visual design considerations. I'll just pause in case there's any further questions in the chat. So there's a question. I see the titles are in Myanmar text. Where is this font available? So I apologize. I don't know. So I didn't set up this demo file myself. So I don't know. I don't know where the font is accessible, where the font could be, where the font is available. So this is something. This is something that I could maybe look into after the webinar. So just to move on, we've touched on how we can add tags to InDesign documents, and we'll move on to further demos of that soon. But there are also visual design considerations that you need to bear in mind when creating documents, which are important as visual design is usually key to InDesign documents. So we're going to consider here use of color contrast, images of text, typography, and layout. So first of all, a really important consideration is around use of color. So we really want to ensure where we've got where we're using color, that it's not the only way that information is communicated. So we may have users who are colorblind or have low vision, or maybe using this, maybe completely blind and are not able to perceive color at all. So we really want to make sure that we're not relying on color vision to communicate information. This doesn't mean that we shouldn't use color at all. Using color can be really helpful for some users. It obviously makes our documents look better, look nicer, potentially. But we need to make sure that where we're using color to convey information, that we also provide an alternative, so that color alone is not the only way that someone can tell what something means. So, for example, here we have a graph from the document we're looking at, and we've got the bars in this chart. We're not just using color to determine between them. We're additionally using a different pattern for each of the items here, like minimum frequency, maximum frequency, and so on. So we're not just using color, we're using color plus a pattern. Other things that we can do is potentially we can provide text. So on some charts or graphs, it might be good to provide textual labels pointing to the various things, so that there is text there as well as color to show something. But it's having that extra way of understanding it that doesn't just rely on color. We can also be careful with our links, that we don't rely on just having our links be a different color from the surrounding content. Ideally, we want to mark them off with something like an underline, because somebody's going to understand that an underline is going to indicate a link generally anyway. But that's going to give it that other indication, other than a different color, that it is a link. We've got some other examples on this slide of use of color in some graphs and charts. So in this chart on the left, cinema attendance in the UK, we're relying just on color to be able to understand which line in the graph is which. So if I couldn't perceive color, I'm not going to be able to understand which of these is which. So this would be a bad example. In the example on the right-hand side, this rates of smoking in some land, as well as using these red and blue colors to distinguish between men and women, we're also introducing a shape for each point in the graph. So we have the circular shape for men, the square for women, so that this is not dependent upon color. This is a good example because we're using some other indicator other than color, so that someone isn't going to be dependent on being able to perceive the difference between those colors to be able to understand that graph. As well as color, it's also important to provide instructions that don't just rely upon one sense. So we want to ensure that if we're providing instructions, they don't rely solely on sensory characteristics. And this can include color, but it might also include shape, size, location. So if someone can't see the document, they're not going to be able to understand potentially what these things are. So we've got an example here. We've got this box and it says, please choose from the options on the right. So if this document is just being read out by a screen reader, it may well not be clear to the user what is meant by the options on the right. This is relying upon sensory characteristics. Similarly, you might want to avoid things like saying, see the information in the rectangle or in the square box or something, where that might not be there for somebody who can't see the screen. These sorts of sensory references can be problematic because users might not be able to perceive the location, the color, or so on. And it could just cause ambiguity about what you're referring to. Saying something like see the content below or see the following content is usually fine as long as your document is fairly linear, as that's usually going to make sense to everybody, including somebody who's using a screen reader. But you usually want to be careful about specific references to shapes or saying options on the right or the left or so on, because these are often just not going to make sense for people. Another very important visual design consideration is around color contrast. So the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines has very clear guidance on this, that if you have text or images of text, then they need to have at least a 4.5:1 contrast with their background. And large text has to have a contrast ratio of at least 3:1 with the background. Large text is text that's larger than 14 point or is larger than 14 point text. 14 point for large is more than 18 points for regular text, or more than 14 points for bold text. If you have meaningful images, so for example, elements in your graphs or charts, they must have at least 3:1 contrast with surrounding elements. Decorative elements and logos are exempt, but brand colors are not exempt. So if you have something like a logo, then technically it's exempt from the guidelines, although it's good to have your logos conform if you possibly can. But something like brand colors are not. So you need to make sure, especially if you're selecting brand colors or updating your brand colors, that you look at the guidelines when you're selecting new colors. And when you get this slide deck, we've got some links to some tools that you can potentially use around color contrast to help with this. And I'll just pop through to have a quick look at these now. So we've got a tool called Color Safe, which you can potentially use to help you in creating palettes in the first place. So you can generate color palettes based on initial selections here in terms of background color, font family, or so on. And it will show you colors that you could potentially use that pass under the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And it will show you how they look against your selected background color and whether they pass or not. Another site that you can potentially use to have a look at what particular color combinations will look like for different users is Who Can Use. And this is a simulator which shows what particular color combinations look like to users with particular vision conditions. So here we have white text on a purple background, and what it may potentially look like to users using different conditions, as well as the color contrast ratio. These type of simulator tools always need to be used with a bit of a pinch of salt, and they're not going to perfectly show what everyone with certain conditions is going to experience. But they can be quite useful to identify particularly problematic color combinations. A really useful tool to download, which you can download with a free, there's a free download for Windows and Mac, is the TPGI Group's Color Contrast Analyzer. The Color Contrast Analyzer, which you can download for Windows and Mac. And this is a free download. And what this allows you to do with this is it offers you a pipette, and you can choose a foreground color and a background color, and then it will automatically tell you whether it passes the WCAG guidelines at different levels. So this can be really useful for documents, especially if you've got a document that you maybe is security locked and you can't get into the you can't edit it in Acrobat and see the options. You can potentially use this to test the colors to see whether the colors pass. Then finally, if you're designing for print, then there are some guidelines here for printed material. There's the ability to also check the color contrast for CMYK values as well as RGB values using this Leserlik contrast calculator. And again, you'll get the link to that with the slide deck, which may be useful if you're specifically creating print materials for print with CMYK colors. So if we pop back now to the slideshow, another thing to think about in terms of visual design considerations is avoiding images of text. You want to avoid using images of text unless it cannot be avoided for presentation purposes. So this is something else that's pointed out by the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, that you don't want to use images of text unless you absolutely have to. Now, this is because you might have users using screen magnification, so they may be magnifying the screen, and text may pixelate when it's magnified, so it might become more difficult to read if somebody's using a screen magnifier and you've used images of text. Text also can't be selected if it's just an image. So you may have users with conditions like dyslexia who are using text-to-speech tools, which are a bit like screen readers, but they're tools that they can use to announce items on the page to them. And they're going to use those, they're going to want to select text in order to have it announced. And if you're using an image of text, then that text won't be selectable by the text-to-speech tool. So you want to avoid that. And also, if you've got an image of text, then the color and size of that text aren't going to be customizable. So you want to make sure, again, that you're not using images of text, so that that text is if the viewer that people are using has the ability to change the color and size of text, that those features will be available for people. And then finally, under visual design considerations, in terms of typography and layout, this is an area where the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines don't have hard and fast guidelines under the AA success criteria, but generally it's best to avoid using fancy fonts. So don't use fonts that are cursive, unusual shapes. Generally, more straightforward fonts are going to be more legible. As a general guideline, and this is not set out in the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, but it's a good idea to try to use a good sized basic font size if you can. So we usually suggest at least a 12-point font size if you're able to, so that if there's users who don't understand how to zoom into the document, the document as presented at 100% is going to be okay for them. It's going to be legible if they print it out. But that's not something that's set in the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, so it's not something you have to do to meet that. But it's a good idea to try to use a decent sized font size in your documents if you can. Just using a simple and uncluttered design can make things be more understandable for people. And if you're thinking about printing documents, there's a link here which you'll get when you get the slide deck to a section on gov.uk on accessible communication formats, which talks about accessibility for print documents. But one tip is to consider cream or off-white non-glossy paper for your print documents to reduce glare, which can help people to read them. So those are some points about visual design considerations. I'll just pause again there in case we've got any questions before we look further into InDesign. So there was a question from Kathy for indicating the location of items in the document. If you're talking about an image, is it okay to say the image to the right describes? Again, this might not, it probably wouldn't be great because it probably isn't going to be. So somebody is accessing that with a screen reader. They're not going to be able to see that the image is on the right. To them, the image is probably just going to follow on from the text in the paragraph, depending upon how the positioning of that image in the PDF, which we'll talk about a bit when we talk about reading order later on in the document. And then there was a question from James about 12 point for body copy in a printed brochure seems huge. What is the balance of these rules for print versus web usage? So I think this is something where it's an ideal. Certainly if you're aiming your printed materials particularly for older users then it's a good idea to try to think about having a version that's got larger text. It may be that you think about having a larger text version as well as a regular version that with smaller text, having a separate large text version. In digital versions it matters less because people can use Zoom, they can zoom in. It's not required by the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines because PDFs have the ability to zoom in. You can increase the text size. It's just if you have the option, it's nice to produce. It's nice to have a decent size font size, particularly if you're intending people to access it with print. But potentially producing a copy which has larger text, if you are producing print materials, might be a good thing to do. If we go on now. I'll just have a quick drink. If we go on now, so we looked earlier at how to use paragraph styles in InDesign. Now we'll look in more detail at other accessibility techniques that we can use. And types of content we'll be talking about, we'll be having a look at headings, we'll be having a look at body text in paragraphs, at lists, at images. We'll look at some complex images like graphs, tables, and tables of content, and how we can deal with these in our InDesign documents. So for headings, we don't want to use, so we talked about this earlier, that we don't want to use styling alone for headings. So if we're a sighted user, we can potentially see the document structure visually. So we can see where there's a larger heading, where there's a heading that's less large, and so on. But screen reader users can use the headings potentially to understand the document, even though they can't see it. So if you structure your document by having an H1 for the main heading, H2 for the next level down, H3 for the next level down, and so on, then somebody listening to this with a screen reader can have the headings announced for them, and they can form a mental map of how the document is structured potentially. They also have the ability with the screen reader to skip to a particular heading, potentially to get to content that interests them. So fundamentally, as we said before, if we've got a heading, we don't just want to use styling for it. We don't just want to add big, bold text for our heading, because then there'll be no indication for a screen reader user that this is a heading or what the level of the heading is. Instead, we want to use paragraph styles, as we saw before, and we can set the export tags on these to H1 through to H6. And then within our document, we want to use a logical heading order to ensure the visual structure of the page is perceivable to people who can't see it. So if we go back to our Dolphin document to have a look at that, something that's important for documents as opposed to web pages, if you're familiar with web design, often people will say that you only want to have one level 1 heading per page. This is much less true for documents, and it's fine in documents potentially to have multiple level 1 headings, because you may want to have a level 1 heading for the main heading of your document, and then potentially it's also fine to have a level 1 heading for each section or chapter. Especially with large documents, you may have situations where people will just share a single chapter of, say, a book, and then it's going to make perfect sense for that chapter to start with a level 1 heading, because it's a different section. So having multiple H1s within a document is absolutely fine. And this is what we've done within this document. So if I've got my type tool selected and we have a look at the main heading of the document here, which is this Dolphin handbook text, you can see I've got a paragraph style called title. And if I edit that and look at the export tagging, you can see that this is tagged as an H1 heading. So that's going to go through to our PDF as an H1. And if we go back to the page we were looking at before, we can look again at this H1 heading, which is called section heading H1, the paragraph style. And if I edit that and go to the export tagging, we can see again that this is going through to an H1 in our PDF. And having multiple H1s in our document is absolutely fine if we're using them for the main heading and then the section headings. Then underneath this, I've got the next section heading down is the child heading of this H1. So it's the next level down. And this has a style called subhead H2. And if I edit that, we can see that the export tagging there is going through to an H2 in our PDF, because this is the next heading level down after the H1. And then on this page, we've got a heading level below this. So something that's going to be nested under an H2. And for this, we've got subhead H3. And we can edit this again, see the export tagging. And this is going to go through to an H3 in our PDF document. If we wanted to add another H3 down the bottom here, with my subhead H3 paragraph style selected, I could type some text here, and this will add in another H3. So I'm going to do 2.3.2 types of dolphin whistle here to add in another H3 there. As well as headings, we can think about body text. So we talked about this a little bit before, that when we've got normal paragraph text, we want that to go through with export tagging with the P tags. This is going to go through as a paragraph, tagged as a paragraph through to our PDF file. Something we can do with our body text is use threaded text frames for continuous content between frames, so that assistive technologies will read the text in an uninterrupted way. So it's one of the things that we can do to help with reading order for assistive technologies in our PDF. And I'll go back now so we can have a look at this. If I go back to our file, we can see underneath my heading here, I have another text frame added on my next page. If I just go through to a text file that I've got here, I'm just going to cut and paste here some lorem ipsum text. If you're following along, you can use any text. It doesn't really matter, just so long as you've got a few paragraphs of it to illustrate this. So I'll then go in here. I want to have my body text style selected. Oh no, I don't want to do that. If I press enter and then select my body text style. And then I'm basically going to paste in that lorem ipsum text that I pasted from my text file. And what you can see here is that it's not gone through to the next text frame. It's basically put it into this text frame. And then if I select my selection tool up here, you can see I get this little red plus sign, which is alerting me to the fact that I have text that has nowhere to go. It doesn't have a text frame to go into. So I can click on this little red icon here, and then it loads up the text in my cursor. I can go down to the next text frame and press enter, and it's going to continue the text into the next text frame. And then I get this blue line here, which is indicating that these text frames have now been threaded. If you don't see this blue line, you can go into view, extras, and view text threads. So here I have hide text threads because I already have it visible. But if you don't see that blue line, you can go in and do show text threads there so you can see it. And this is basically helping to tell a screen reader that when they get to the end of this line, they want to go directly and into the next line. So it's one of the things that we can do to help reading order, and we'll look at some more things as we go through this morning. Another thing that we consider is lists. So as we mentioned earlier, if we're introducing a list into our document, we don't want to use styling alone. So we don't want to draw a bullet, write some text, press enter, press tab, add another bullet. We want to use the list function within InDesign, which we can do by selecting a list and then creating a paragraph style for lists. And I'll show you how we can do this if we go back to our document. So again, I'm going to select my type tool, and I've got a list up here, which we looked at slightly earlier. So we can see here for this list, I've already got a paragraph style for this list. If I was creating a document from scratch and I didn't have a paragraph style created for lists, I could do this by creating a list, using the list function, and then creating a paragraph style from that. So I'll demonstrate here at the bottom of the document. If I just type, I'm going to type list item 1, list item 2, list item 3 here. So if I want to make this into a list initially, I can go up to the top here, choose the paragraph formatting controls, and I have the option to make a bulleted list or a numbered list. So here I could make this a bulleted list. I could then create a style. If I press plus here, that'll create a new style, and I can create a list style. So I'll just call this new list for now. The export tagging is set to automatic, and this is what you want to see because I've created this as a list. I could also go in, and if I wanted to change things, I could go into the bullets and numberings here in the paragraph style options for the list. I could add new bullets, I could edit the bullets, I could do various changes here. Just so that we change it slightly, I'm just going to slightly change the left indent and the first line indent so we could see what that did. And this will just slightly change the way that this looks. But this is the way that you can create a list paragraph style so that you can then use that and apply that to other lists. And because it's created from the list function within InDesign, it's going to have that automatic export tagging, which we want to see, so that when this is converted to PDF, it will go through and it'll be properly tagged as a list. And we just got the point there that you want to see that automatic there for your export tagging for your lists. Informative images, you want to make sure that if you've got an informative images that it's going to provide appropriate alternate text. And we can do this via something called the object export options. We also can anchor our images to a particular location in the text, again, to help reading order, so that we're telling screen readers, you read this text and then you read the alternate text for this image. So if we go through here, back to the InDesign file, I'll just demonstrate this with the image I've got here. So first of all, I want to select my selection tool in the top left here. And then if I click on the border of the image, I can select that image. And if I right click, I can get object export options. And if I open this up, you can see that under the alt text tab, I've got set here some alt text for this image saying bottleneck dolphin communicating through whistle, which is providing alt text for that. There is the option under alt text source. If you use Adobe Bridge, there is the ability in other Adobe Bridge programs, so things, other Adobe programs like Illustrator and Photoshop and so on, you can potentially add a description into the metadata there. Gradually, they're rolling out across the programs the ability to add an alt text field directly to the metadata on images. This can be a useful thing to explore if you're using Adobe Bridge, and then if somebody creates something in Illustrator or Photoshop, they can add in the description there, and then you can pull that via Bridge when you import the images into your InDesign document. So that might be something to look at doing if you have a workflow where you're utilizing Bridge and other Adobe programs, but you're always able to just manually add an alt text description into this field so that there's something there to describe the image. We can also see here we've got this little anchor tag. So this image is anchored to the end of this paragraph. So this is saying that in the tags tree in the PDF, we want this to go after this paragraph. So to be announced directly after this paragraph by a screen reader. We've got this anchored already. We could unanchor it by right-clicking on the anchor and then going anchored object release. And if we wanted to set it again with the selection tool, so from the top left here, we click on the blue square and we just drag that to the end of that paragraph. And then we've anchored that again. So this is another little thing we can do in terms of helping the reading order. Another consideration with images is that we may have decorative images. So we may have images that just doesn't make sense to announce anything for a screen reader. And we want to mark these as artifacts. So an artifact in a PDF document is something that is not going to be announced by a screen reader. It doesn't exist in the tags tree. It won't be announced by a screen reader. So here we have something that potentially is a decorative image. It's probably not going to make any sense to announce anything for this. So we want to make that into an artifact, which again, we can do via the object export options. Sometimes you might be wondering, should this be a decorative image or should it not? How do I make a decision about this? When you get the slide deck, there's a link here to the Web Accessibility Initiative alt decision tree, which is a useful decision tree which goes through choices which goes through sort of the decision about, is something decorative or is it informative? And that can be quite useful to use if you're having trouble deciding whether something should be decorative or not. But we can have a look how we can make something into an artifact if we go back to the document here, and we'll look at this example. So again, with my selection tool, I can click on the border of that image. I can right click and do object export options. And if we go to the tagged PDF tab here, we can see that has the tag of artifact selected, so that is going to be tagged. That is going to go through as an artifact to our PDF, and that's how we can set artifacts up via InDesign. So if we pop back here, complex images are another thing that can come up. So if we have complex images like graphs or charts or illustrations, it's often going to be best to provide a two-part text alternative. So ideally, with our alternate text, we want to keep it reasonably short, probably no more than 2 or 3 sentences if possible, because it's really there just to give an idea to people about what that image is. We don't want to put huge amounts of content into our alt text if possible, because when alt text is read out for a screen reader user, it's all read in one go. It's going to be very hard for them to digest if we're putting paragraphs and paragraphs of information in there. So if we have a complex image, the best thing to do is to provide a short alt text that provides a short description of what that chart is, why it's there, maybe the basic point of that chart if possible. And then if it's necessary for people to understand all of the information in that chart, you could provide a long description by potentially providing a long description in the document. So in the case of a chart, as we'll see in a second, you might provide an accessible table with the same information. You could also include that information in an appendix that's linked to, maybe within a footnote. You could also include the long description on an external web page, but potentially, as long as you're linking to that, although we don't generally recommend that, because when you do that within documents, the websites tend to disappear over time, and then people with the document are left with no access to a long description. So generally, it's better to put the long description within the document somehow. If we go back to have a look at our example document, we can see we've got a chart here. Again, if I select this and right click and look at object export options, we can see under alt text that we have short alt text of bar graph showing minimum and maximum frequency and duration of dolphin whistles. Detailed table alternative is provided below. And then below that, we've got a table which is setting out the same information that's in that chart, but it's providing it in a table format. So someone using a screen reader is going to be able to have that announced to them if they want to explore all of the data in that visual chart. Tables in general, as we've said with lists, we don't want to create tables manually. So whatever you do, you don't want to kind of draw a table on the page using drawing tools. You want to use the create table functions within InDesign with table, insert table. And then this will create a table that will go through as a tag table to our PDF document when we create it. If we have a look at the table that we've got in this document, we could see some of this. So I've got my table here. If I get my type tool selected and click on my table, you can see I've got my table options. So this is the insert table if we wanted to add a new table. With the top row here, you can in InDesign define this as the row header for the columns. So you can do that with table convert rows. So here I've already got it as a header row, so I can convert row to body. But if this was just a body row, I could convert it to header. Unfortunately, in InDesign, there's no way, ideally, to set columns as row headers. So ideally, these headings here, Queen Latifah, this should be set up as a heading for this row, but you can't do that within InDesign. You need to go do that in Acrobat after you create your PDF with the table editor, which I'll try to show very quickly when we produce our PDF later. You can merge cells though. So in this table, you don't really need to merge cells. But if you did need to merge cells, you can do that by going to table and merge cells, and it will do this accessibly. So in Word, if you're familiar with Word, the accessibility checker tells you not to merge cells because it can't be done in a way that's accessible for screen readers. But in InDesign, you can merge cells, and when it goes through to a PDF, they will be merged correctly in a way that's screen reader accessible. But there are limitations in InDesign with complex tables. There's things that you just can't do. So it's generally a good thing with tables to try to keep them simple and not have very complex tables with multiple layers of headers, because this is going to be a lot more work that you have to do in Acrobat, because there isn't a way in InDesign to be able to do it. If we go back to this now, links. You can put in links with the hyperlinks window, which you get under Window Interactive Hyperlinks. I'll just show this now. So if we go back to the InDesign file, again, I'm going to get my text tool selected. My type tool selected, and then I've got something up here where I can turn into a link. I want to have my hyperlinks window selected, so I go to Window, Interactive, Hyperlinks to open up my hyperlinks window. I can select the text that I want to be a link here, and I can press plus to add a link. And then I can put the text that I want to link to here. So en.wiki.org/wiki/dolphin. I'm generally going to want to untick shared hyperlink destination unless I am sharing the link through the document, which you're very rarely going to be doing, because this can cause problems if this is tipped. So I want to do that. Additionally, so these are the basic things I need to do to create a link that's going to be accessible in PDF. There was a question earlier on, which I said I'd look at when we got to the links. But I think the person won't still be on the call because they had to leave. But they're saying they have a problem with link tags throwing an error. I can see the tag is there when I check in InDesign and Acrobat. What am I doing wrong? This one I'm not totally sure, but certainly in some accessibility checkers like the pack checker, it will throw an error if you do not have alt text specified for the link. You can do this under this accessibility tag in Acrobat. So we could add alt text here, Wikipedia/dolphin. We could add this in here, and then a checker like the path checker, which is checking to the PDF UA standard, will then not raise an error for the link not having alternate text. So it could be that if you're seeing errors in an automated checker for links, it could be that it wants alt text to be set for the links. This is something that's not completely, this isn't really necessary for WCAG conformance. So if you need to meet the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, you don't necessarily need to have alt text for your links as long as your link text is descriptive. So the key thing here is we've got a descriptive link. It makes sense out of context, and that's how you want to have your links, really. The PDF UA standard, however, which is a more complex technical standard for PDFs than WCAG and goes into more detail, does say that all links have to have alternate text. Although I think there's a proposal for the next version of PDF UA that will be removed, because it's kind of contrary to what WCAG says, which is that as long as the links need to be descriptive in context, which say this link is. So in WCAG, it wouldn't be necessary to provide alternate text for that link. But the alternate text feature can be useful in some cases. So if you've got a document that maybe you've got a PDF document, you don't have the source document, you're stuck with a link that's not descriptive, providing alternate text for that link in the PDF is going to be a good thing to do. But you may also see errors raised in automated checkers if you're not adding alternate text for the links. So I'll just pop that in there, and then we've got our link created. This should go through to an accessible link in the PDF, and we've got this little green icon here just showing that this link is, so it's doing a link check and just checking that that link is available. Tables of contents, one final thing we can look at before we just go to questions again. So again, with tables of contents, you absolutely want to use the built-in features in InDesign to create these. You don't want to try to create your table of contents manually, because again, in a PDF, a table of contents has particular tags that you expect to see in your PDF document. And if you use the table of contents feature within InDesign, it'll create those tags automatically for you, so you don't need to worry about it in the PDF. And you can do that via the table of contents tool, which is in the layout. And I'll go back to the demo file here so we can have a look at that. So if you go to layout and table of contents, it's got the setup for that table of contents there. Just going to cancel that a second. Let's just go up and have a look at the table of contents we've got, and then open up layout, table of contents again. And the way that the table of contents feature in InDesign works is that it uses the paragraph styles for headings that you've set up. So it's another benefit of setting up paragraph styles for headings, that you can then leverage those to easily create your table of contents. So basically here, I've asked it to include in my table of contents the paragraph styles for section heading H1, subhead H2, and subhead H3, the different levels that we saw earlier on. And then for each of those, I've defined a style as to how those are going to look when they go into the table of contents. There's also the ability here to create PDF bookmarks, which is a nice feature, especially for longer documents. You want to create those bookmarks because they're quite useful for people to provide another way to get around the document. So I would always have this ticked, and then you'll create those bookmarks automatically as well. So if we click OK here, it's then going to update, and you'll see it's updated. It's automatically added that extra H3 heading that I added in, because it's just pulling that in automatically when it updates the table of contents. And if we look at those table of contents styles again, we'll expect to see under export tagging, they're all going through to automatic, because we've used the table of contents feature, all of this is going to go through to a properly tagged table of contents in our PDF file. So I'll just pause here. We've got some more, we want to talk about reading order, metadata, and exporting our InDesign document to PDF in a second, but I'll just pause. Here. So just looking back, there was a question. So a question more related to use of headings on web pages. I was taught you have to go down the headings in order, e.g. H1, H2, H3. However, this sometimes has created issues for representing subheadings of equal importance. Is it possible to go use the headings as follows: H1, H2, H3, H2, H3? Hope that makes sense. Yeah, that's fine. So you can have multiple headings at the same level. So you could have multiple H2s at the same level, multiple H3s at the same level, if that makes sense in terms of the structure of the document. What you don't want to have is have gaps between the headings. So I think there's another question from Mark in relation to the question above. Can you miss an H tag? E.g., can you have H1P, H3P? So you can definitely have paragraph tags in between your H tags, but you don't want to have you don't want to miss a level in the H3s. So in this example, you don't want to go from H1 to H3. You want to go from H1, and then the next level down should be H2, and then the next level down should be H3. So some of the automatic checkers will flag an error for you if you miss a level in the heading hierarchy in your PDF. So you want to try to make sure that you don't miss levels. So you want to have H1. You could then have multiple H2s if you want, but you don't want to have a gap between an H1 and an H3 in the heading level, if that makes sense. There was 1057. That's a question earlier, 1057. So there's a question: when creating layouts with more visual design, often pull-out boxes or large quotes, for example, may be used, which do not follow the threaded text boxes. What is the best approach to ensure these are accessible? So we'll be covering that in reading order. So here you want to use the articles panel to have those in the right order, and we'll show that in a second when we get through to that. I'm a bit concerned now because we've only got another 12 minutes and quite a lot of content. So what I'm going to do now is just go through the rest of the content to try to get the content complete by 11:30, and then so people can leave if they need to leave at that point. But I'll come back to the remaining questions at 11 once we finish the main content, and and if it's okay for people just to go a bit over from 11:30. So I'll cover the remaining questions once we've covered off the rest of the content. So I just want to get through the rest of the content to make sure that we've covered it by 11:30, and it might also answer some of the remaining questions. So thinking about reading order, so within PDF, reading order is slightly complicated in that there's two reading orders that matter in a PDF. Probably the most important one that matters is the tag order. And this is the order that's used by screen readers such as NVDA and JAWS. And this is defined in your InDesign document. You can define this in the articles panel. The articles panel is read from top to bottom, and anything left out of the articles panel is going to be artifacted in the PDF file. So we talked earlier that an artifact is something that's not in the tags tree. So we can use the articles panel to ensure that our tag order is correct. And I think there was a question about things that like boxes or large quotes, for example, that might not follow the threaded text boxes. If you've got a complicated visual design like that, the best thing to do is probably to use the articles panel. If you have a very simple design where you've just got text and a few images, it's probably enough just to use threaded text frames. You might not even bother, you might not even need to use the articles panel. But definitely if you've got a complex visual layout, you're going to want to use the articles panel because that enables you to explicitly set the order for the tags. There's another order that matters though, however, in PDFs, which is the object order. And this order is used by the reflow functionality in PDFs. It's also used by some text-to-speech tools like Read and Write Gold. And this order is defined in the layers panel, and the order in there goes from bottom to top. And I'll show you the way that you can set the reading order correctly in both these places if we go through back to the demo file. So I was talking first about the tag order in the PDF, and this is set via the articles panel. So I can open my articles panel by going to Window and Articles just to open this up. And basically I've already put most of my content here into the articles panel. So as we go down here, I've only using one article, so you can potentially create multiple articles if you want. It doesn't make any difference for the user in the MPDF, but if you've got a very long document, you may want to create multiple articles. But I'm just going to have a single article here. I'm going to drag in the content using my selection tool. I'm just going to drag in the content here. Oh, do that. Don't want to create another article. Just going to pop it in under there so that it's added to the articles panel. So now all of this content is going to go through to my tag PDF in the order in which I've dragged it in here. Now there's an important caveat, and I thought this might be what's happened. So there was a user saying that suddenly they're not getting any of their articles or tags going through to the PDF. A very, very important caveat here is that in the articles panel, there's this little box, this little option that says use for tagging order in tag PDF, and you need to make sure this is ticked. And if that's not ticked, then basically the articles panel will not be used at all. So it's very important to make sure that that is ticked so that the tags go through okay. So that's how you can use the articles panel, and this is really important for the tag order of the PDF. The other order that potentially matters in a PDF document is the layers order, and you can see this in the layers panel, which you can get to under Window and Layers if you don't have it open. And essentially the layer order goes goes bottom to top. So on this page, I've got my pasted graphic is the bottom item, which is correct because visually this is the top item on the page. Then I've got my dolphin image here, and finally my dolphin image, my dolphin handbook text. So it goes from bottom to top. And when this goes through to the PDF, the object order will be correct. And these will be, this will work correctly in things like the reflow function, if that is used. So these are the two reading orders that potentially matter, that you can set in your InDesign file. If I go Alt-Tab, yeah, pop back here, headers and footers. So I think there was a question, I think there might have been a question that relates to this, but headers and footers basically should be artifacted in the PDF document. They are the way that that you want headers and footers to be artifacted, because when a screen reader user, say, is reading the document, it would be very it wouldn't be convenient if at the bottom of every page it stops and reads the header text, the footer text and the header text before they can get through to the text on the next page, potentially in the middle of a paragraph. So the convention is that the headers and footers are artifacted, that they don't go through to the PDF as tags. If they're built into your master pages, you can they're automatically going to be artifacted when you save to PDF. So if you use the header and footer functions within InDesign, it's going to artifact them automatically. If you're not using those, then you could use the articles panel and just leave the headers and footers out of the articles panel, because as I mentioned, if there's things that are left out of the articles panel, they won't be tagged in the PDF. But you need to ensure that any essential information in headers and footers is repeated elsewhere in the document. For example, the title page. So you don't want to have something like the author's name only be available in the header or footer, because then it won't be available for screen reader users. So you want to repeat it elsewhere, as like in the title page. And I think there was a question about page numbering in footers. There's a question, we get complaints that the automatic page numbering at the bottom of the page is not available to a screen reader. Any advice on how to address this? So screen readers should have the ability, they will have the ability to call up the page number. They should have the ability to call up the page number within their screen reader functions. So depending upon the screen reader, there should be a way to call up the page number of the page. And this is something which generally you'd leave to the screen reader, but that's something which they might need to look at the options for reading PDFs with their screen reader to be able to see how they can call up that screen that number using their assistive technology. Providing metadata, the really important thing to make sure that's filled in terms of the web content accessibility guidelines is that files need to have a document title, a descriptive document title. And you can do that under File, File Info, and fill in the other fields if you want to. But the main thing you really want to do is make sure that the title is available. So if we go into our InDesign file and go to File, we can go to File Info. And we can see we've got a descriptive title here under document title. So this is what we really want to have filled in. And then this will go through OK to the PDF document. I'll just close that. And then if we pop back to the slide deck here, and then finally, we just want to think about how we can export to a tagged PDF. So there's various options here. There's export as interactive PDF, which generally is what you're going to want to, is going to be the option that you'll want to use to export if you're creating a PDF for a web page. There is currently, I think there is still an open bug with exporting as print PDF, and I was wondering if that, I think there was a query from someone who was saying that they're having trouble exporting and their tags aren't going through, and I was wondering if they're using the print PDF export, because I know there's an open bug with Adobe at the moment, so I would avoid potentially using the export as print PDF at the moment, and maybe that's what the person is experiencing. Maybe try the export as interactive PDF and see if that works better. To do that, you make sure that by default anyway they'll have the create tag PDF option there, and also tick use structure for tab order, and under advanced you can check that display title is there for the document title, and I'll show that in a second. I just had here the print options. As I said, I think there's currently a problem with saving as a print, exporting to print PDF. So there may be problems with this, but when this is available, you can fill things in. But if you're just creating for a web page, for a website, it's fine to use the interactive PDF option. The thing that you don't want to do, if I just show on the PDF, you do not want to use File, Print, and then print to PDF. Print to Adobe PDF. So this will produce an untagged PDF. So again, this is a potential problem if that's another way in which somebody could be creating a completely untagged PDF if they're using that option. So you don't want to use that. If we go in here and use export, and then we'll Adobe PDF Interactive, we can see the options that we've got here. So we want to make sure this create tab PDF is ticked and the use structure for tab order. And under advanced, we want to make sure document title is selected and that we have English UK, and we can export that, and we'll get our PDF file. If I open my PDF file here, and here we finally have a PDF produced from our document. So I could go in here, I could open up, if I've got Acrobat Pro, I can open it up here and I can see my tags pane. So we could have a look at some of the content we were dealing with today. I could potentially select this content. I could find tag from selection in the tags pane. And you can see that because we went to all the bother of setting up those paragraph styles, it's got my main heading here tagged as an H1. My paragraphs are tagged as paragraphs. My H2 is tagged as an H2. And my list, if I find tag from selection for my list has all the necessary tags for a list built in. Apologies, it's 11:30. Please do leave if you have to leave, and the session is being recorded. But I will run a bit over just to complete the the content if that's okay, if people are able to stay. Otherwise, please do leave and have a look at the recording. So I was going to mention quickly with tables. So I mentioned earlier that you can't set all of the table options using InDesign. So what you can potentially do is open up the accessibility tools, right click on the table, select your reading order, right click on the table. You can open up your table editor, and using the table editor, you could potentially, so it's already got these set as table headers, which is correct, but I could additionally set these as table headers with the scope of row as well, so that these were correctly set, as well as the header cells. So I could set all of these with a scope of row. I won't do all this now, but you could also make sure that these had a scope of column on my header cells at the top here. So this is just a little bit extra that you can potentially do in Acrobat that you can't do with InDesign. I'll also quickly run the accessibility check here, so you can see how you can run an accessibility check on the document. You can see here that it's not coming up with any issues, but it is telling me I need to manually check my reading order and my color contrast. But this is how you can run a quick check, as well as, and we can also check the metadata. Let's just quickly check that everything's gone through okay. So I can also check, if I go to File Properties, that my title has come through okay from the PDF, from the InDesign, and also my language has come through okay, and my initial view is set to document title. All of that are the things that we set in the InDesign options. If I pop back now to here, so we can check all of that. On this slide, we've just got a few other potential checkers you can use. So Adobe Acrobat Pro has a checker built in. There's also a free checker for Windows called Pack 2021, which is a useful kind of supplement to the Acrobat checker. And when you get this slide deck, you'll get the link to that. If you don't have Acrobat Pro and you only have Acrobat Standard, then there's a free plugin from Common Look called the Common Look PDF Validator, which you can potentially use. And if you don't have Acrobat at all, there's an online checker called Pave, which I think is more limited than the other checkers, but maybe an alternative if you don't have Acrobat at all to check a PDF. But you do still need to do manual checks as well as the automated checks for things like reading order and so on. So I will go to questions in a second. Apologies again that we've run over. Just to say that in the zip file that I dropped the link to earlier, which you'll also get as a link in the slide deck when you get the slide deck, as well as the demo file, there's also an optional exercise where there's a document where I've basically sabotaged some of the accessibility features to provide an exercise that you can work through. So using that exercise, you can go through, have a look at it, and see if you can work out how to ensure that the export tagging has been correctly set on the heading styles, ensure all the images have alternate text or they've been marked as artifacts, as decorative. You can potentially add a table of contents to that, ensure the reading order for page 1 in the articles panel is correct, and ensure the document is titled. So if you haven't followed along during the session, it can be good to have a look at the demo file first, and maybe have a look at that, and then also potentially have a look at the exercise file, as of course a lot of the things within InDesign are very make a lot more sense when you actually are doing them for yourself rather than just listening to them. So hopefully these will help reinforce the things that we've talked about today. So today we covered a lot of ground. We talked about what makes an accessible document, some basic InDesign accessibility strategies and tools. So thinking about using paragraph styles, making sure that we bake as much accessibility as possible into our InDesign documents. Some visual design considerations, including color contrast and use of color, and then a demo of creating accessible content with things like headings, lists, images, tables, artifacts, links, and tables of content. And then finally, exporting to an accessible PDF, how to create a tagged PDF from that. Apologies again that we've overrun, and please do leave if you need to leave. I'm going to just go back now and see if there are additional questions that I can answer before we log off. So there's a question: does the title of the document on the cover page need to be assigned H1? So I would say yes, that's usually going to be a good practice to do, because that's going to be like a main heading for the whole document. So I think a good pattern is like we did with the example document. We made the main heading on the title page be an H1, and then potentially each section heading be an H1 is fine. But generally, I'd say that the main heading is usually going to be a good idea if the main title for the document is assigned H1. So there's a question: how to set language for a diff for Gaelic document version. There's not an option. So this is problematic within InDesign. So I don't think there's a way within InDesign to do this. There's a way within Acrobat that you can set the within Acrobat, you can go in and you can put a language code instead of the so it won't be, the language isn't available in the drop down, but you can go in and choose the ISO language code and put the language code in instead, and that will work. But you can't do, I don't think you can do that by default in InDesign. So there's at least there's no basic InDesign functionality for doing that. Going back to see. So there was a question for organizations that procure InDesign services. Do you have any advice how they should request from their design agency that the PDFs they request are accessible? And how could they check that the PDFs they receive are accessible? So this is a very good question. I think it's important when procuring, if you're procuring websites, I think it should be the same as with documents, that you should try to make sure that when you're procuring them, that in your contract, you say that you want your documents to be WCAG conformant. So you say you want them to meet WCAG. Now it would be version 2.2 level AA, and you include that in your contracts. Now it may well be that it might be helpful to provide them a bit more detail about that, so that they understand what that actually means. So it may be useful to include some links potentially to the Adobe site, to their basic links about what constitutes an accessible PDF. You might also give some examples of the sorts of things you expect to see, like having images with alternate text and so on. When you receive the documents, I mean, a good thing to do is just run that basic Acrobat accessibility checker. Do they pass the Acrobat accessibility checker? If they don't, then that's an obvious thing that you can do to then send that back. Then there's also the more complicated issues like reading order and tag order, which hopefully you can test using some of the principles that we've shown today. But I think the most basic thing you can do is run the Acrobat accessibility checker on the documents you receive, and basically send them back and ask for corrections if they're not passing the Acrobat accessibility checker. Would be the most basic thing that you should definitely be doing, and definitely including in your contracts that you want documents that are conformant to WCAG version 2.2 level AA, so that you're getting that into the contracts, that is something that you expect to see, and then following up on that as much as you can. I think it's a difficult area because so many design agencies just don't have a clue what you're even talking about. I mean, this is also potentially a red flag. If you've got a choice between multiple design agencies, it's obviously a good idea to try to choose the one that actually seems to best understand producing PDFs. So you can ask questions of your design agency if you're choosing them. Can you, have you produced accessible PDFs? Can you provide examples? Can you provide contacts with clients who you've provided this for, so you can check up on them? But it's something that hopefully should get easier over time if enough people insist that design agencies do provide do consider accessibility when they're producing PDFs. Let's just see. So there's a question about, can character styles be tagged? And if not, how are 2 styles recognized in the one paragraph? So character styles, you can kind of use them. You should be able to use them alongside paragraph styles. But character styles as such, you can't like assign a tag to them in the same way, but it wouldn't be necessary to do so, because essentially, let's suppose you created a character style for well, for a PDF, it wouldn't be necessary to do it, because let's say you had some bold text and you create a character style for bold. There's no tag within a PDF for bold, so they just don't need to be tagged. So in terms of PDFs, we're really looking, as we said, at headings and paragraphs. And so only paragraph level text or heading level text is really going to be used. So you could then add a character style onto within a paragraph, but it doesn't need to do any tagging. It's fine to use character styles, but you want to use them alongside paragraph styles and the paragraph styles are actually doing that. They need to have the export tags to control your tagging. Just going back in case I've got a feeling I haven't covered absolutely every question. Any tips for rolling this use in InDesign across an organization? Where do we start? So again, a really good question. I think a good thing to do is, as I mentioned, in terms of the really critical thing, I think, is to get people using paragraph styles to start with. So if you have things like templates, InDesign templates within your organization, or certain starter files that you use, then making sure that you've got some styles set up in there for your paragraph style, for your headings, so that they're in there, so that people can start using them, so that you've at least got that available at a basic level, and some sort of basic, I think you need some sort of basic education training like this training that people get. But also trying to make sure that insofar as you're supplying things like example files or template files, that you make sure that you're using paragraph styles within those, and you've got the right mappings in those. So you've got a good starting point then, if you've got base files that you use for projects for particular things. Just going back now, hopefully. Yeah, there was one from Kiva. Can you show the table of contents tagging again? You were too fast. Apologies for that. I think maybe with that, if I show it again, I think the thing to do there is maybe to go back, and if you go through the demo file, let's pop this up. So we've got this here again. I think with that, because we've just got so little time, I think the thing to do is to have a look. If you explore the table of contents with the demo file, potentially with the recording, and then go in there yourself, and you can actually see how it's constructed in the demo file, is probably the best thing to do. Hopefully it will make sense when you actually go through it yourself. I'm just having a look at to get the options open here again. Essentially what we're doing with the table of contents is we're adding in the paragraph styles for the various headings, so that the text that's in those headings becomes part of the table of contents. And then there's a defined style for each of those headings. It's a bit difficult to describe, but if you go in and explore this in the demo file, hopefully it will make sense. There's also some information, I think, on the Adobe site. If you look up creating a table of contents with InDesign, there'd be some information that you could look at there. Hopefully that'll make more sense if you have a go with the demo file and try that and see how it's constructed there would hopefully make things make more sense.